We have now come to this beautiful house on the edge of the Big Island of Hawaii. We're now on the other side of the island, over near Kona. And this house is a $12 million house right on the edge of a seaside lava cliff. It's actually an amazing location. From here I can look out and see these amazing cliffs just fading into the sea. It's really a beautiful scene. We're not going to be spending multiple days here to teach you things that we've already gone over. I want to use this house to teach a couple techniques that we haven't yet touched on. So we're only going to be shooting two spaces. We're going to be doing an interior with the view and an exterior. The first shot that we're going to be doing is this indoor-outdoor space, and I chose it because it's especially difficult. We've got that sun low on the horizon glinting off the sea, coming in and filling this area with light. Another issue is that I can't really composite this space together because there's a lot of breeze and wind coming in here, and this giant light over the pool table is blowing around. So if I were to keep my camera on a tripod and stack exposures and brush them together, I would always have some movement, some motion blur, and it would be a total nightmare to composite this scene with that light blowing around. So since I can't composite this scene later and make it perfect in post, I've got to really take my time here and get it right on location. What we're going to do is wait for the perfect light. I want the sun to be low on the horizon, giving us our key light, some great directional light coming straight into this room. And then I'm going to use some umbrellas, some different modifiers to light this up and keep it looking as natural as possible, rather than just smashing it with light and photoshopping it together after. In order to get this all in one exposure, because it's so dark in here and so bright outside, if you'll notice this is an entirely wooden room with many dark surfaces, we're going to have to use a lot of strobes in a relatively small room. Since I know I want the sun to be my key light, I'm going to set the exposure to the sun. That is, I don't want any of that sunlight to be blown out or underexposed. I want that to be just perfect. From there, I'll build the rest of the scene to complement that sun. Now that I've got my exposure set for the sun, it's time to add some fill. I'm going to light the foreground first because that's going to be the most important part of the scene. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a Profoto B1 bounced into the wall to add some fill. Since I know the sun is so low on the horizon and there's that classic golden light coming in, I know I'm going to have to gel my lights to warm them up from that cool 5000K daylight into something that matches that low golden sun. I want to keep the sun as the main light and then add my own strobes for fill. So all I need is a little kiss of light here and there to bring this up. If you'll notice, again, the ceiling and these walls are a bit warm, so I'm not going to go full CTO, just a half should be enough to make it match that sunset light temperature. After I've got some fill in the foreground, I've got to add some fill on the right-hand side. If you'll notice, there's a really dark sculpture on the wall, and I want there to be some texture in there. Since my shutter speed is so fast to expose for the sun, it's killing all of the interior practical lights in the scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that second light up just enough, I'm going to bounce it off the wall, and what I want it to do is add some texture to that completely black, dark sculpture. I really like the wood in there, and it fills in what would be an otherwise totally blank spot in this picture. So now we have two lights coming from camera right, and if you'll notice, the scene is still really dark. What I'm going to do is I want to add some soft fill light on the front of this pool table. I love the wood. I want to keep the texture in that wood. So the first thing I did was I actually put an umbrella right here next to me, and I found that that was really flat. It killed the texture in that pool table and it just didn't feel right at all. It made it look like it was floating. Without any shadow, it gave the illusion that there was nothing grounding it to the floor. So what I did was I moved it over to the left, and I had some nice directional light coming towards the camera to bring out that nice texture and woodwork in the pool table. You may be thinking, oh, that looks great, but there's a couple problems with this that I have to solve. First, I think since my umbrella is so close to the pool table, there's a lot of fall off from left to right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually grab a one-stop scrim, and I'm going to flag half of that umbrella to knock down that light closest to the pool table so I get a more even spread of light across the front of it. The second problem is that because the umbrella is pointed straight into the lens at kind of an oblique angle, it's causing the light to skim right across the front. That's causing a good deal of flare on the left-hand side of the frame. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually grab a flag. It's one of my black and white cards that I talked about in the gear section, and I'm going to put that right next to my camera, clamp it to a light stand, just in the perfect spot to block that light. Now I was looking through the viewfinder to just get it in the absolute perfect spot. It's probably about 1 millimeter out of the frame. That ensures that not only will I block any light coming into the lens, but I'll still be able to see through the lens and make a picture. Obviously, if your flag is in front of the camera, it blocks the lens and you can't see through it. So you want to get it in that spot just so it stops that light skimming across the front of the lens. Usually this is about 1 foot in front of the lens. If you go too close, the edge of that flag gets blurry and can cause some more problems. So keep it a little bit of a distance away. So now let's take a shot and see how this looks. All right, and as you can see, that flare on the left-hand side is completely gone. If I wanted to composite multiple frames, it would be a complete nightmare to do so. Imagine if these lights had motion blur on them. If I had to put a new background in, it would almost be impossible. Or if I wanted to combine a flash exposure and an ambient exposure, and they had moved between those two exposures, it would take forever to make that perfect. Now, instead of having to use a very long ambient exposure to expose for the interior of the room, because we're at such a high shutter speed, the flash freezes those lights, they're nice and sharp. So this shot is almost done. One thing that jumps out at me is that it's really hazy outside and the sky is really dull in this photo. So what we're going to do is I'm going to actually jump into my sky library, grab a sky, and replace the sky outside with one of my favorites from my library. Alright, so we've got all of our pieces. We got most of this shot on location, so let's jump into Photoshop and put it together. Okay, so here we are at our last location here in Hawaii, and as you saw on location, this was a relatively tricky shot. We had a crazy dynamic range, but we did love that mood. We were using the sun as a key. We had that nice golden light filling everything in, and I think it's going to be a really fantastic shot, but there were a few things that popped up in post that are going to make this a little more difficult than I had anticipated. And first, there was a ton of haze out on the horizon, and it was also backlit by that setting sun, so we have a really flat, uncontrasted scene out there with not a lot of color at all in it, so we have to change that. And secondly is the breeze inside. It was actually blowing the pool balls all over the place. It was blowing that lamp around. I mentioned that on location, but it's going to be a little bit tricky to deal with here in post. So with that being said, let's go through our files, pick them out, get them ready, and put them together in Photoshop. Alright, so here's a few test shots, and you can see one really cool thing. I think you can see that we were predicting where this sun was going to be, and you can see these kind of sunbeams starting to fill in the room. Here we are adding our light, getting everything ready, and eventually we have this really beautiful sunlight filtering through, which adds a ton of depth and drama to this scene. It also gives like a sense of place and a sense of time, rather than just being a wide-angle shot of an interior lit with flash. We've got a really great mood going here. So I'm really happy with our lighting and our staging and all that. But again, look out this window. It's just this white, flat, featureless, colorless scene. And my goal is going to be, how do we finish this photo and pull everything together so it feels really, really great. So now we've gotten to our flash scene, and everything inside, the time of day is right, the staging is right, the lighting looks really, really good. The interior, we've done a great job on it. I'm super happy with it. So I'm just going to set this one aside. I've gone ahead and marked it for use later. And as time goes on, you can see the clouds are moving outside. The intensity of the sun kind of wavers and fades and comes in and out. So all I want to do is I want to take a couple maybe ambient light exposures, for example, this one here. And I really love this light in the ceiling, so I'm going to set that aside for later use as well. And lastly, I have my flash, my ambient, and now I just need to find a scene for the view, which is going to come out of my my ambient bracketed exposures. I'm going to use one that was maybe 2 or 3 stops under, so we can actually see what's going on out there. So I've gone ahead and, as usual, set these all aside. I'm going to do my usual Lightroom adjustments, which are just shadow and highlight, again, to prep that raw file to get all the detail I'm going to need out of these files. So in this case, we'll bring the shadows up, bring the highlights down. Don't want to go too far with it in this case. If I go too far, you get this kind of muddy, like gray feeling to it. So just a little bit there in the highlights and a bump in the shadows. I'll go ahead and apply that to everything. And let's go ahead and go into Photoshop with our prepared files. All right, so here we are in Photoshop. I'm going to go to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack. Browse to this lesson folder and open up. There are 4 files here. Go ahead, click Open and OK. Alright, so first thing that pops up is this included sky file. Of course, we're going to be doing a little bit of sky replacement, but we don't need that now, so let's go ahead and hide that. Then we have our view frame here. We have a little bit of directional light out there when we actually begin to see through that haze. You see some of that sunset light grazing those trees. We'll go ahead and close that. And if I turn that view on and that
view off, and you can see underneath it just how flat it is once things start to get out of hand and overexposed. So I'm only going to use that ambient light for inside, and I'm going to build it on top of my flash base layer here, which is my favorite shot from this entire session. So in order to bring back some of this natural ambient soft light feeling to this scene, I'm going to be brushing in this ambient frame. And you can see, like, for example, down here in the corner, if I turn this on and off, you get a really great kind of depth to the light, a nice soft filtered light coming in that window. And we have our flash to lift our shadows and add some contrast and color, but I really do love that soft filtered light provided by the ambient only exposure. So I'm going to go ahead and add a black layer mask by alt-clicking the Add Layer Mask button. Take my brush, again I'll go to 30% opacity, and I just want to start gently brushing in some of that soft filtered ambient light, just to bring out some of those more natural shadows. There we go. And up on the ceiling, we're going to start seeing some of that recessed cove lighting filter through here. And if I turn that on and off, you can really see how that ambient light makes the scene feel much more realistic and believable and not flashy at all. So the next problem is the view out here. I know I need to tame this a bit so that the viewer can actually see what's out there, and I also want to make it feel a bit more contrasty and a bit more like it's colorful, like it feels like the time of day, because right now it's just this gray, ugly sort of white mess outside with it's not interesting at all. It looks like there's like haze, like a smoke from a fire or something out there. It just looks really bland, and I know I have to fix that. So this is the kind of time-consuming, annoying part of this whole thing. I'm going to take the pen tool, and I am going to select all around the window and interior here. So all of that white overexposed view is going to have to be selected. And in many cases, I would try to get away with using a select color tool or a luminosity mask, but the range of luminosity out this window is so varied. We have very, very dark shadows down at the bottom with the grass, and we have this really complicated sort of these chairs with the light coming in and out in the wood, in the fabric, in the walls. A luminosity mask, you're welcome to try it. I could not get it to look decent, and I had to resort to the pen tool, which I know is time consuming, but I also know will get it right 100% of the time with no guesswork. And I'm just going to go all the way around all these lights. Okay, so our pen tool selection has been completed around all of the window frames. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command Enter, or Control Enter if you're on Windows. Shift F6 to feather that edge by 1 pixel. I'm going to turn on this view layer, and I'm going to apply that selection to that layer. And now, as you can see, it feels a little bit fake, especially in the foreground here, where it's gone a little bit too dark. But it feels really nice outside. I do think it still needs a bit of contrast. So I'm going to add a little bit of curves adjustment here. I'm going to brush it in and out, but before I do that, I'm going to reactivate the selection, and I'm going to go to Select, Save Selection, and because I know I'm going to be messing with that window throughout this picture, I'm going to save this clean, unedited selection. I'll just call it Window View, so I can always be sure I can go back and grab it if I need it again later. So let's go ahead and turn that off by hitting Command D or Control D, and let's take a brush, and where I think this is too dark or too contrasty, at 30% opacity, I'm just going to paint it out using a black brush so there's a more natural transition from interior to exterior. Something like that feels much better. Okay, now we do have that nice sunlight on these trees back here, there's a bit more color and definition, but I think we still need some contrast. So let's go ahead and load our previous selection. And I'm going to select a curves layer. The mask will come loaded on that curves layer since we already selected it and got it out of our load selection toolbox there. And I can add a little contrast back here to make things feel a little bit more alive. Bring some color out. There we go. And again, I think we've gone too far with it, especially in the foreground. So I'm going to kind of take a brush and brush out some of that extra contrast up front, because obviously the further away from the camera you get, the more haze there is. So because these things are so close to us in the foreground, all we really need to do is add contrast to the back. And what a huge difference that has made from this muddy, gray, flat scene to something that actually looks pretty decent out there. Okay. So now the exterior is looking pretty decent, but I still think it's a bit too flat for me, and I would like to personally replace the sky and go from that white featureless sky to something that feels a bit more like a sunset sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to select. I'm going to use my color range selection tool here, and I'm just going to select the white out there. And once I've made a selection that this isn't perfect, obviously, but you can play around with it and you can get as much or as little white as you want, and you can adjust the fuzziness until you get to a point that you're happy with. If I zoom in and I go too far with the fuzziness, I lose that crisp edge. If I go too far this way, the opposite happens. So you want to find a point where you have a nice soft edge in those trees and branches and everything, but you do have a nice solid white up here. So go ahead and click OK. And come to your sky layer here, and I want you to go ahead and apply that mask. Now before you turn on the sky, let's Alt-click on the mask itself, and let's clean this up. So I know I have this perfect tree line, but obviously this is not a very good mask where we have this, maybe like 30% gray down here. So I'm going to take a lasso, or a polygonal lasso, or a pen tool, or whatever your favorite tool is, and across that horizon line where I know I don't want the sky to dip below, I'm just going to drag that all the way out. And I'll get the rest of this stuff here as well. And using a black brush, I'm going to paint out all that extra so that our sky will not show up there when we mask it in. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing around this pillar. So this is just a lasso. Go right down that edge, make sure we have a nice perfect mask here. And get all this stuff. Take our brush and paint it out so we have solid black. Now the last thing I want to clean up on this mask before we turn on our sky is that there is still a bit of gray, kind of like pixelated, posterized gray. I'm going to take my brush, set the foreground color to white because I do want that white mask there, and change the blend mode to soft light. And in soft light mode, you can easily paint out that gray. And you can switch to black to your heart's content so that you get a nice clean white mask where you need it. If you go too far, you can easily paint it back in. All right, now don't forget to change the blend mode to normal, or you'll pull your hair out trying to figure out what went wrong the next time you need a brush. And I'm just going to clean up anything that we might have missed. But on the whole, I think we got everything. So let's go ahead and start putting our sky into the scene. So I'm going to turn the sky on. And obviously that doesn't work. So let's resize the sky and skew it in there so that the size and scale match our scene. So I'm going to go ahead and unlink these. That will let me adjust the size and position of the sky without messing with the mask. I'm going to make it smaller so that it fits in that window there. And obviously I want the horizon to match that of the ocean. But there's a problem here, and that problem is that the sun in our sky is on the left, but if you look at our actual picture, the sun is coming from somewhere over here. So let's go ahead and flip that sky horizontally, and that will feel much, much better. It still feels a bit fake to me, so what I'm going to do is on this layer, the mask here, I'm going to take a maybe just like 10% opacity black brush, and I'm just going to kind of conceal that transition from ocean and trees to sky so that it feels a bit more lifelike, a bit more natural. There we go. And you can also adjust the opacity of the layer itself, again, so that things feel a bit more natural. Of course, you want to make sure your horizons match up from your replaced sky to your actual working document, so that again, the scale, the size, the perspective all stays the same. All right, now that's looking pretty good. It looks a little bit fake to me still, so I'm going to go ahead, and I think there's too much blue in it, so I'm going to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. I'm going to clip it to that sky, grab my hand tool, and I'm just going to take out some of those blues so it feels like a nice golden warm light out there. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now, to really drive this home, I'm going to load our selection, our entire window selection. I'm going to click OK. That's going to bring me back to here. And I'm going to add a solid color adjustment layer. Pick a nice golden warm color here. Something like that'll do. I'm going to set the opacity to 10% and the blend mode to color. And that's going to put that nice sort of golden color wash over the exterior. But I don't really like it on the water. I do like a bit bluer water, so I'm just going to paint it out. 100% opacity over the water. Bring back some of that blue. I'll adjust the mask a little bit. This cloud's kind of cramping my style here. Just paint it out just a bit. All we need is a hint of sky out there to make it feel believable. All right, so that's looking good. I'm gonna clean up my document here. This is gonna be my sky group. Call this our view. Call that our base. All right, so we went from this like mismatched color-wise, overexposed, gray, dull, flat exterior to something a bit more believable, a bit more interesting, something that adds a ton of mood and character to this shot. And on the whole, I think that's a big improvement. So let's take a look and see what else I want to fix here. I noticed that there's a little bit of a problem with these lamp cords. Again, as they blew in the wind, they probably got misaligned, so I can fix those. I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to call it lamp cord fix. And let's see what I can do to fix this here. I'm going to pen tool these. Come down, go right around this. Control Enter, Command Shift C, or Control Shift C to copy all. And I'm just going to nudge those over so they line up and transform it. That's looking much better. Now I've got to kind of clone out the extra that I left in there. That looks good. We'll do the same thing for this light over here. Pen tool. Nudge those until they make sense visually. And I'm just gonna clone out that extra that I left in there. You kind of got lucky in that it didn't move too much, but you can see how if it was windier, this might have been a real nightmare. All right, that's looking good. I go ahead and make a new group there, call it clone. Take a minute to run around the image real quick and just get rid of all this little stubborn stuff, all these little stubborn things. All right, this is looking really good. Let me take a minute and just get everything on the same page, brightness and contrast wise here. Maybe add some contrast to the whole scene. And I want to bump the exposure just a little bit. All right, that's looking really good. I'm just going to take a second and see if there's any last bits that I could take care of. I thought about trying to light these tiki candles, but I feel like from experience in real life they would not show up at all, so it might look a little bit fake if I were to light those out there. So I'm going to let those be, and I know that we'll get them in the twilight. But on the whole, I think that's looking good. I'm going to clean up this as like a zip tie or something. And after this, I think this shot's done. I'm loving this. I'm going to go ahead and call this shot done again. Let's run through everything, check out what we did. Pretty big improvement for sure. With all of our lighting and all that compositing. A bit of work, but we got a great result out of it. So we took care of the view, took it from a flat, no contrast, gray view, added our sky, did a little bit of cloning and color correction, added some contrast, bumped the exposure, and there is our final shot. I'm going to go ahead and Command-Alt-Shift-E and flatten all to a new layer, and as usual, drag out some vertical rulers and straighten those lines out. This looks like it has a little bit of barrel distortion, so I'll go ahead and fix that. The quick lens correction filter, and then we should be on track to straighten this all out. Perfect, perfect. All right, there we go. Hit enter to commit our changes, and I'm going to go ahead and crop some of those missing edges. And there is our finished shot. All right, so that was our second to last shot at this location. Let's go ahead and get ready for our twilight. This is going to be one heck of a shot with the house looking over the ocean, and I'm really excited for it. Let's go back on location and get to it.